Welcome to another episode of the Visionaries Podcast powered by StartUp Westport, where we dive into the minds of the biggest names in business and innovation. I'm your host, Jay Norris, CEO and co-founder of Guest Software. We're sitting down with Connecticut's Chief Economic Development Officer, Dan O'Keefe. Find out what makes Dan tick daily, as well as what are his plans and goals for the state of Connecticut. So, today we have Mr. Dan O'Keefe, the new Chief Economic Development Officer for the state of Connecticut. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yes. You know, Dan, I've had the honor of getting to meet you about a year ago now, when you were your first or second day in office?
Second day in office, although at that point it was Chief Innovation Officer for the state. I wasn't yet Commissioner.
Oh, right, okay.
It was almost exactly 1 year ago.
1 year ago, yes. We had an honor of introducing you during our StartUp Westport. We had just started the venture, and I remember Cliff was like, Jay, there's this guy, Dan O'Keefe. We can't get Dan Bickle because something happened, COVID, and it was like, Dan O'Keefe, bam, and it happened, and I wanted to thank you for that.
Sure.
It was great.
I offer you my condolences because the other Dan would have been the better speaker.
No.
I was happy to do it.
You were excellent. No, you were excellent. So let me dive in here. And when people, you know, I've had about 4 or 5 guests thus far. And the thing that I'm always curious about, even though I read your story and also saw you on stage and you told us about, from your professional career into this public service. But now I was like, well, I wonder if anyone knows, where was Dan O'Keefe born and raised?
Born and raised in Massachusetts, outside of Boston.
Okay.
I like to say I grew up in workforce housing. One of the big topics in Connecticut is the shortage of workforce housing.
Okay.
And I like to say I take it deeply personally because I grew up in workforce housing, although we stretched the definition. My mother was a public school teacher, and we had 8 people packed into a 3-bedroom, so we stretched the definition of workforce housing. But I also look back at that time and think I was incredibly lucky. I grew up with a mother who valued intellectual curiosity. She taught us to always be asking questions. And that, if I look at now my career, which I went into the technology world and we can talk about that, but much of that career was just about being intellectually curious, about asking questions, about trying to understand markets, trying to understand companies, trying to understand where they might be going. And I credit my mother and my upbringing for a lot of that.
Wow. And so, did you say 8?
We had 8 people, yeah.
Wait a minute, 8 brothers and sisters?
No.
Oh,
one brother and one sister. It was a brother, a sister, a cousin, parents, and grandparents.
Got it. Okay, all in one. Okay, got it.
And now when I see multi-generational households,
right,
I know what that's like.
Yeah, I know.
It has its benefits and its drawbacks.
That's great though, and I like that you credit your mom to that, because that's a lot of people forget. You know what I mean? Like they go on and they say, I don't know where I got that skill, and you're like, oh no, mom planted that seed in us.
I know exactly where I got it.
That's great. That's great to hear. And so, then you did high school in Massachusetts?
I did. Yep. I did 2 years at a public high school and then went off to a boarding high school.
Okay, boarding high school.
Growing up, I had a quirk for mathematics.
Okay.
And so ended up going to a school where I could foster that, and so focused on mathematics and physics, and then went on to an academic career that focused on analytics and mathematics.
Analytics. Okay. College where?
I was a nerd.
I see.
And I am a nerd. I went to Brown University.
Oh, you went to Brown.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Great school. I know a lot of buddies.
I would argue it's the best school.
Yes. I got some buddies that do the same. They are big time. They're like, Jay, you need to come on up here. I go see them every once in a while in Providence. But so then Brown University. Professional career, first job, what was that like?
My very first job?
Yes.
You mean out of college, or you mean
out
my very first job? Okay.
Oh, well, no, hold on. Yeah, let's go back to the first job.
My very first job that compensated me.
Right.
I did little things as a kid that didn't come with compensation. Was landscaping.
Okay.
I would get dropped off at a site and I would weed for 8 hours, 5 days a week. And I loved the experience. I learned how to do hard work. I learned how to work hard for compensation. I also learned and I wanted to pursue my education
Yeah, you
as
were like,
seriously and as
you were
passionately
like,
as I could.
do this. I mean, get education
There are other
is
forms
the key
of
to other
there are other
things.
forms of landscaping that I think are a great career. Weeding all day long as the junior guy was not one of them.
Yeah. Wow. So that was the first stint.
Yeah. O'Brien Landscaping in Natick, Massachusetts. Mike O'Brien, if he's listening.
I know, right?
It's
Still around?
Yeah.
Oh, it's wow. And so then, okay, but out of college, what was your first role?
First role out of college was in investment banking. So
Okay.
I mentioned, kind of focus on mathematics that eventually took me into a academic focus on economics, and then ultimately a early career focus on corporate finance.
Got it.
And I actually switched my major 3 times while I was at Brown, and only at Brown can you switch your major 3 times and still graduate in 4 years. But I started out as a mathematics and physics concentrator. I thought I would go into that field. As I learned about the practical applications, what careers look like in that sector, I decided it wasn't a great personality fit. So I shifted into engineering, and then I eventually shifted into economics and business management. And that's what I ultimately graduated with, which I viewed as kind of the practical application of analytical underpinnings. Which again is part of why I went into corporate finance, and I did my 2 years in investment banking, and then came into the investment world.
Wow! So you did 2 years, 2 year stint. Did you, going into that 2 year stint, did you know that was going to be? Did you think in your mind, okay, I'm going to do 2 years here and then go and somewhere else, or was it?
No, I had
spontaneous?
no idea what I was doing. I had no precedent to follow. I didn't have anyone that had a Wall Street career in my circle of people I could talk to, and so I was figuring all of this out in real time. What I can tell you is very few people go in as an analyst in investment banking and stay in investment banking for the rest of their career. At that level, it's you're just building. In some ways, it made weeding for 8 hours look like a better experience, because
like
now it's building financial
MBA.
Models for 15 hours a day. Very little time off, including weekends. So it was a very intense experience. I'm glad I did it. It's how I really learned, kind of corporate finance coming out of a liberal arts school. It isn't necessarily part of the training, and I really got an incredible training. And in fact, it's funny, you're asking me about this today. My very first boss just emailed me today, just checking in and seeing how things were going.
Very first?
Very first boss.
That's so cool. You still keep
outside of
your
landscape.
First boss. Right, that's awesome. Besides the weed guy.
Only because we're on the story, I will tell you, I had 2 first bosses. So I had 2 senior folks in the M&A group at what was then called Solomon Smith Barney, and they both have become lifelong friends. The one I heard from today, I hadn't heard from him in a while. It was great to catch up, but his partner, who was also a close friend, ended up retiring from what ultimately became Citigroup and became a CFO of 3 of the companies that I invested in. So he and I had, and I guess still have, a 25-plus year working collaboration. And it's one of the messages I do try to talk to folks about when they're earlier in their career. I want some of the advice I often give is treat everything like an interview. These are folks that are going to have influence well beyond this experience, and you don't necessarily realize that when you're young. So treat everything like an interview, and stay in touch. People you meet throughout your career, you kind of get a sense for who are the good ones and who are the less so. And I really try to hang on and stay close to the good ones.
That's great to hear, because I always bring back, people ask me, why did you create the Visionaries podcast? And to me, being an entrepreneur or starting companies, whatever it may be, it's about the relationships and the vision and connecting the dots with numerous people along the way that can add value to your strengths, right? And so it sounds like you've been doing that throughout your entire career, staying in touch with those people.
Well, one of the downsides of coming into some of these industries without necessarily a background that might lend themselves to it, or family relationships. Again, my mother was a public school teacher. She taught public school for 35 years, incredible body of work that I sit in awe of, but didn't exactly start to develop relationships that I might leverage in a corporate finance career.
Correct.
And so, one of the things I started very early in my career is just looking for mentors, looking for folks who might take a bet on me, and might actually be willing to invest time beyond just whatever they could get out of me. And I've got to tell you, I look back now, I retired from investing after 25 years. I look back now at some of the folks that contributed to that body of work, and I thank you doesn't do enough. It was a kid who literally had no idea what he was doing, that they said, I see something here. And so even though I'm going to have to work harder because this kid doesn't know what he's doing. They were willing to invest the time in ways that I'm just deeply in appreciation of.
That is such great. I mean, when I think about that soundbite, and I hope people are listening to that, because ultimately, we started the mentor program at StartUp Westport.
Yeah.
And it's really about that one. We call it reach one, teach one, in a way, right? And you're saying that that's been a part of your legacy.
I don't know about my legacy. I would say it's the legacy of others that I've benefited from. And that now I am trying to do the same and give back. I mean, I do know that without a doubt that wherever I got to or wherever I am now or wherever I might go was not a solitary effort. It was all accomplished and continues to hopefully be accomplished with the help of others. I mean, I'll mention one just because it sounds like you're going through my life track. So the next question you might ask is, what's my next job? And that after I did 2 years of investment banking, I went to work for what was then called Patrikoff & Co. Ventures. It was one of the country's first venture capital firms, founded by a gentleman, no surprise, by the name of Patrikoff, Alan Patrikoff. And Alan very quickly became one of my closest mentors.
Wow.
He's now either about to or, no, I think he just turned, he's now in his, I don't want to get this wrong.
80,
so Alan,
90.
Forgive me, I think you're 90 now.
Wow.
If he's not, he's about to turn 90. And Alan ran the New York Marathon last year.
At almost 90?
He recently wrote a book. He would say if he were sitting here, he didn't run the whole thing, but still, he completed it. Let's put it that way. He completed the New York Marathon.
Walked 26 miles.
Which is still incredible. Maybe we'll all be doing that when we're octogenarians. And he's still my last phone call before every hard decision.
Really?
Absolutely. Alan, he's an example of someone who's got an incredible life experience, an incredible amount of judgment that he can bring to helping think through decisions. But more importantly, a willingness to make that body of experience and that judgment available to others.
And to share in that knowledge. I mean, that's rare.
It's a great example of, I think, the types of folks who, again, very charitably have been willing to engage with younger folks as they come up their career. And I very much focus on that myself now. I view myself now as more on the coach side of the equation.
Exactly.
I define my success now less by what others can do for me, but more by what I can do for others. How can I get others to grow and be successful? And my view is if they're able to, then that's my ultimate barometer of success.
Wow, Dan, I think the governor selected the right guy, the right guy for the role. So here's a quick question for you. New York, while you were in the city, suburbs, moved to New Canaan.
Yeah.
Was this your first outside of Massachusetts, but you were living in the city, right? And you moved out.
Yeah.
What was that like? How long?
Well, it's a very typical story I've since learned, which is we got pregnant with number 2.
Got it.
And my wife and I we were in Boston, and then I moved back. So our older daughter was born in Boston. We moved back with about a 2-year-old. She's now 15, but she was about 2 then. And we got pregnant with our 12-year-old. So we had a young one at home. We were pregnant with number 2. I had a job that was a travel job. We had a dog. We lived on the 17th floor of an apartment building. So whenever I had to travel, no surprise, all systems got complicated. All systems broke.
Oh my God.
My wife, who, she and I both grew up in the suburbs of Boston, so we weren't necessarily city people, but she was always the one that really wanted to be in the city. And we had a night where we were sitting at home, she's pregnant, very pregnant, and she hit mute on the TV screen and said, I'm going to talk to you. And she said it with such gravity that I thought something might be wrong with the baby. And she said, oh, no, everything's fine. I just don't want to be, I don't want to be in the city anymore. And I said, done.
Wow.
30 days later, we rented a house in New Canaan, and that was the end. We've been out in New Canaan ever since, and we loved it.
Wow, that's great.
And it really was about, then I wanted a place where I wanted to raise my family. And if I think back to those years, I mentioned I went away to a boarding high school. And I now look back on those years and realize I was really paying attention. I was really paying attention to what was going on around me. I was paying attention to what I thought were some of the characteristics of ultimate success. And I don't mean just success professionally. I mean success, great family, personally, enjoying yourself, quality of life, all that stuff. And there were folks who are still friends to this day, but who were from Connecticut. And I remember thinking, okay, Connecticut, these people are impressive. These are the folks that I'd never been on an airplane. They had traveled the world. They all wore these fancy North Face jackets, which I don't even know what those were. I now know, deep-seated in my head was, Connecticut is where you went once you made it.
Wow.
And so when Sarah and I, we hadn't made it yet, we had no money at that point, but we had enough to say, we now want to start thinking about where we want to raise a family. And we, and like all good marriages, principally these are decisions of my wife, she really agreed that we wanted to raise our family in Connecticut.
Wow.
And it's been incredible. We haven't looked, I think all the reasons why you live here, why I live here, where I chose to bring my family here is because of what Connecticut has to offer. You know, incredible quality of life, incredible education system, and great place to raise our kids. And you know, now I think post-pandemic, you know, other people are realizing it too, which is why
oh my God, it was just like a catalyst. I call it COVID the catalyst for Connecticut. Right, for the right residents. I had a nice chat with the first select woman about that. Yeah. Like the people coming in droves during COVID. And
well, you know, again, going back to my own decision, when we moved here, I had a tough commute, right? I mean, coming from New Canaan, and there are other communities where it's even harder, but it was over an hour, and you know, but I was willing to make that investment because I thought the return for my family was so high.
Yep, the quality of life here.
And now, if you look at it with more flexibility, people still commute into New York City, but don't necessarily have to do it every day the way I did. So the investment is lower. So you know, it makes it even easier for people to live here. Yeah,
no doubt. I mean, I went from doing 4 days into the city before COVID to maybe 1 or 2 now. Yeah. And I think that's really why, you know, we started these new, what I call ecosystems, StartUp Westport, you know, ecosystems that you're creating. Yeah. Let's dive into those. Yeah. I read somewhere that the state just posed a new $100 million program for entrepreneurs or innovation around placemaking and all these other spaces. Could you share a little bit about?
Yeah. Well, so let me step back a little bit and tell you where we went. And it's called Innovation Clusters, is what you're referring to. It's a $100 million program. We just announced it probably about 4 weeks ago now, 3-4 weeks ago. And you know, first let me just tell you what I was observing. So I treated, when I first started to talk to the governor about getting involved, I realized I had never sat down and studied the Connecticut economy. I moved here for all the reasons I described, but those were soft and fluffy reasons. I didn't actually look at the economy. And so to get more involved with economic development,
it took some time.
It doesn't take a genius to know you should actually dig into the current trend lines. And I built an analysis that just looked at 20 years of trend lines. Because my view is, if you really want to understand and have insight into what the future might hold, you should really look at the past, but zoom out. And when you look at the 20-year trend lines, you see something super interesting, which is, you know, we had the years leading up to the great global financial crisis. So these are the years leading up to 2007, 2008, and our economy was booming. I mean, going on all cylinders. And then the global financial crisis hit us disproportionately hard. Finance and insurance is one of our largest sectors, so no surprise it hit us pretty hard. And then we had the period which they now refer to as the lost decade, and that is an absolutely accurate reference.
Really?
In the period from 2008 to 2018, our economy got smaller. On an inflation-adjusted basis, we got smaller. And you don't have to have an MBA to know that is not the direction you want to go in. By the way, only 3 states can say that: us, Wyoming, and Mississippi. So it was bad years. And then we had, congratulations, a global financial crisis. A global pandemic.
Exactly. 2020.
Which none of us want. Right. Which hit everybody hard, not just the state of Connecticut. And so to put some numbers around it, in the 2 years prior to the pandemic, we were the 48th worst performing economy in the country. 48.
Wow.
Now the pandemic hits, and you know, I now have a thesis that it rewrote certain rules. None of us wanted the pandemic, but it did accelerate certain trends. What you and I were just talking about, this greater flexibility, not having to commute to some cinder block box somewhere as often as we used to, that opens up more flexibility on where to live. So in 2020, we saw a trend that all of us probably experienced. I had 3 homes on my road turnover that weren't even for sale because everyone was dialing for dollars coming out of New York City. Right. Question, of course, becomes, well, okay, have those trend lines continued? Now I look at the 3 years post-pandemic. Our population has gone up. This is Census Bureau data. This is not Connecticut public official playing with numbers. Census Bureau data. Our population has gone up each of the last 3 years. We're the only state in the region whose population has gone up in each of the last 3 years. By the way, to put that in a little bit of context, and over those 3 years, we've gained tens of thousands of new residents. New York, to pick on New York for a minute, but I will pick on them, where I used to work out of, has lost over 600,000 residents.
I
Now,
was
it's a big
with,
state, it can take that hit.
Eric Adams' office last week, and they were talking about.
And look, New York City has come back, but New York City will always be New York City. But I just think this quality of life dynamic, again, what I described as being soft and fluffy characteristics, without any of our hard work, all of a sudden became economic comparative advantage.
Yes.
Because with more flexibility on where to live, more people are choosing a place like Connecticut. We have an opportunity right now to be the first hybrid state.
Yes.
Now, what did I see as I dug into some of what was driving some of that growth?
Right.
So population we talked about, which is a lot of quality of life, but then I looked at economic trends. And I mentioned the 2 years prior to the pandemic, we were the 48th worst performing economy. In the 2 years post-pandemic, we were the 15th best. 1-5.
Wow.
It's a $280 billion economy. These things don't turn on a dime like that. So we also saw reacceleration in economic growth, the likes of which, I can't find another state that can say that kind of dramatic turnaround.
Okay.
So the last 2 years, we've been the top performing economy in terms of GDP growth in the entire region. So I like to say we're back-to-back champs, not just in basketball.
And when you say region, are we talking the whole Northeast?
New England.
New England, right, okay.
And if you include New York, last year we grew three times as fast as New York.
Wow.
So New York's losing people, we're gaining people. New York grew 0.7% last year. We grew over 2.1%. So we're experiencing a moment right now. Connecticut is experiencing a moment that I want to capitalize around.
Do you know what about the other neighboring states to New York, like New Jersey? Are we commiserate? Is it
New
close?
York's actually, New Jersey's doing pretty well. New Jersey's doing pretty well.
They're growing as well.
Yeah, I don't include them in our region, although it is a competitive state with us. So
I see, but you're talking Mass. I'm
talking Mass. I'm talking New England plus New York. That's where I mostly focus.
Okay.
And then if I'm extending it, I'll look more at things like Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And if I extend it even further, I'll look at the Carolinas and Florida. Those are the reference markets I look at.
I see.
And mostly I look at the region in terms of competing for talent. We tend to compete for talent from places like Massachusetts and New York, no surprise. And then I look at places like the Carolinas and Florida in terms of post-pandemic trends, because those are also states that are benefiting from it. People are going to warmer weather states,
yes,
no surprise.
Of course.
And that is also where we tend to lose retirees. If I look at population trends, we tend to gain people in their late 20s, much like me, when you're starting a family and starting your career. We tend to gain people from New York and Massachusetts during those years, and we tend to lose people to places like Florida and the Carolinas once they retire.
Become snowbirds.
Now, I'd rather keep everybody here, don't get me wrong, but if you're asking me, how do I feel about that economic trade, I will take it, because I would rather gain at the beginning of someone's earnings journey and lose at the end.
Right.
So I feel reasonably good about what we see there.
Wow.
And again, overall population trends have been quite positive, continue to increase. And so the reason why I give you all of this context in answer to your question about innovation clusters is as I looked at all of that, and again, with an investor mindset, what I used to do, if this were a company, would I want to invest or not? And the answer is I would want to invest, because the trends that I'm seeing are conducive and constructive as they relate to forward investment and forward growth.
Got it.
Now, we've got a little bit of a challenge. We've got a little bit of challenge because as I travel around the state, I get a lot of skepticism. I get a lot of people that say, well, GE left. By the way, it was 2016. That was ancient history. They'll say, well, we had, what used to be referred to as a permanent state of fiscal crisis. Okay, but we fixed that. We fixed that in 2017 with the fiscal guardrails. Since then, every single year, we've had consistent budget surpluses. We now simply said to our system that we're going to manage the Connecticut budget like everyone should manage their household. We're just not going to spend more than we make. Every credit rating agency has increased the rating on our debt. They're seeing the same trends that I'm describing and saying it's just a much better place to invest. That happens to be debt. And so that's increased or decreased the cost of our debt. In the meantime, over the last 5+ years, our system produced $11 billion in surpluses. We use that money to pay down our unfunded pension liabilities. Last number I saw was $7.7 billion. I think it's higher now. It's closer to $8 billion. And we maxed out our rainy day fund at its statutory cap, $3.3 billion. I'm glad we did all of that. That reset the table. That said to our business community, this is going to be predictable and stable. It's a place where you can invest. It said to our, the credit rating agencies that this is a place that's more accommodating, and we're not accommodating. This is a place that's more that's going to be good stewards of our capital, and so all of that means that our fiscal house is now back fundamentally in order.
That's great.
The next time we see a significant increase in surpluses, and we will, our economy is over-indexed towards cyclical end markets.
Okay.
I mentioned finance and insurance being one of our biggest markets. That's 13, 14%. That's indexed towards capital markets. We talk a lot about manufacturing in the state of Connecticut, which is 12% of our GDP, but what we're really talking about is national defense, our national defense primes and the supply chains that feed them. That's about 90% of our manufacturing industry. So it's really national defense, which unfortunately is indexed towards global unrest. So our system is naturally cyclical. So what that means is there will be another upcycle. If one thing I've learned from now living through multiple cycles is they will cycle. We will see another upcycle. And the next time our system produces those kinds of consistent surpluses, I'd like to see us get a little bit more front-footed. I'd like to see us continue to pay down the mistakes of our past. We do still have a high per capita debt load. We've still got some more work to do there. But start to invest more aggressively in our future. And I'm talking about being strategic. Investing in industries that matter to us and where we have competitive industry and competitive advantage, and also start to look at some of the innovation that's occurring in some of those large industries and support their digital transformation. This is the longest answer to the shortest question, but that is what we're doing with innovation clusters. What innovation clusters now is a $100 million program and investment specifically geared towards the application of next generation technology, quantum computing, artificial intelligence, advanced data sciences, to industries where we have competitive advantage.
Got it.
And those are industries like financial services, insurance services, healthcare. Those are our largest markets. And if you think about what's happening with those large markets, they're getting fundamentally impacted by technology. Financial services is becoming fintech. Insurance services is becoming insurtech. Healthcare is becoming biotech. So those are all markets where we have fundamental competitive advantage, where we have an incredible workforce, we have incredible large corporates in support of that transformation. And we've got all of these new residents who, I saw it when I went to StartUp Westport.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
I showed up and I was expecting,
a couple people to show up, right?
350 people showed up. Now that's probably because they thought it was going to be the other Dan speaking.
No.
But still, I was blown away.
Ultimately, I think about it, we started with 4 or 5 of us, as founders, and there's like over 1,600 as members
amazing.
now.
It's amazing. But I use this now as a data point of partially supporting my argument that Connecticut has transformed. That influx of new energy, new population, none of those folks have that skepticism.
No.
They all are, I don't say they all, but many of them are participants in some of this new economy, this entrepreneurship, this digital transformation. And so I just simply want to say to I look at all of those trend lines, and I just want to say to folks, you got to put the skepticism behind you, because actually the data would suggest nothing but a cause for optimism. And if you want to invest, if you agree with me that we should be investing in those trend lines, you don't invest with skepticism. If you're skeptical, you don't invest. You don't buy that machine. You don't start that business. You don't hire that person. You invest when you believe the future is going to be brighter than the present. And you don't just believe, you see it. You can see that it's happening. And that's why I'm saying to folks now, like, look, if you hear everything I'm saying, if you believe that I'm telling the truth, and I am, I can back all this up with data.
The data.
Then your skepticism is unfounded, and your skepticism needs to go away because it's still holding us back. And if it's not going to go away, then get out of my way. Because the governor and I are deeply aligned on this. This is a moment we're not going to squander. We're going to continue to invest in our economy and its growth. We're going to continue to invest in the workforce of our future. We're going to continue to invest in the infrastructure required. We're going to continue to invest in housing. We can talk about all of these things. But I just need everyone
to lean
grabbing
in.
an oar and start rowing with me.
That's it. Let's lean in. Let's lean in. So one last question, really two. And I already caught that, because the innovation clusters essentially is truly the vision that you guys set forth, you and the governor, or in the whole office. What about you, Dan? What would you say would be a personal, by 2030, North Star for Dan O'Keefe, as far as, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like certain things. Do you have one?
No.
Nah, you just...
No. Well, but let me explain. I mentioned my background, and I always... I will admit, I always had an eye towards a phase of public service. My view was I've been incredibly fortunate, incredibly lucky. I mentioned, kind of moving in my career towards more of a coach from a player, and I want to start. I want to start spending more of my life focused on impact for those around me.
Got it.
And And I first started this journey, as they call it, when I met with the governor 18 months ago, January of 2023. We met, we shared a pizza, and the whole conversation was about impact. Was about, how could I spend the next 25 years of my life, which is only because I spent 25 years in the private sector. That's where it comes from. Hopefully I'm still engaged at 75, but we'll see. But I want to spend the next 25 years of my life having the greatest impact on the greatest number of people that I possibly can.
Okay.
When he and I started that conversation, I was thinking about something potentially at the federal level. And he made a point to me. He said, look, he said, if you really care about impact, that doesn't happen at the federal level. Things move slowly by design. It's where you see the headlines, but things move slowly by design. If you really want to have an impact, that happens at the state, at the local level. So he said, just meet my team and see if there's a there. That's how this whole proverbial journey started.
Wow.
And what I will say to you is he was right. This week marks my 1-year anniversary of joining the administration, and I really do believe he was right. If you really care about the lives of people and want to have the greatest potential impact, I think this is the type of position where hopefully I can do that. Where that takes me over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Look, I started my private sector career having no idea where it was going to take me. I'm starting my public sector career having no idea where it's going to take me, but I just want to learn. I am an absolute sponge. I am learning about how all this world works, how to affect change, how to be impactful. I don't know if I'm good at it yet. That time will tell, and I'll let others make that call. But I can tell you I'm enjoying the exercise.
It sounds as though you started the conversation with your mom sparking the intellectual curiosity. It's still there.
100%.
It's still there.
100%.
It's still there.
But think about my old world. My old world, I had one of the best jobs on the planet. It was financially rewarding, but I would have, done it for a lot less. Don't tell my former bosses.
Right.
I found it so rewarding because I got to spend every day, every single day, meeting with entrepreneurs and learning about their vision of the future. I fed off that energy every day because these are incredible people, right? These are people who could see the world that doesn't exist today and see what it could be. And I had the opportunity to work with founders like Daniel Ek at Spotify or Jen Hyman at Rent the Runway, or incredible people who truly had a view towards, and I think ultimately were successful in changing the world. And now I look at this now as a similar exercise. If you're curious on what parallels I see, one of the parallels I see is I get to spend every day now talking to stakeholders in our lives, right? These are political leaders, community leaders, nonprofit leaders, business leaders, and really putting together a rubric of what this complex system that is the state of Connecticut might look like over time, and start to put the pieces in place now that hopefully will affect that future that will be better for our children.
Right.
That I find just as intellectually stimulating and energizing as my work in the private sector. Some folks did say to me, like, you gotta get involved with public service, prepare to be frustrated.
Right.
Prepare to be frustrated by the pace of change. Prepare to be frustrated at what it takes to get things done. Look, things don't happen quickly in public service. They're not supposed to. Democracies are built to run slow. They're built that way for a reason. But I like puzzles. And I like looking at the different inputs, understanding who the different stakeholders are, and start to engage with folks to move things in the right direction over time. And I can tell you, the governor, I always say I don't pander for anyone. He doesn't need me to pander for him, but I can tell you he thinks the same way. He cares about outcomes. He cares. He's deeply committed to a positive future. He's not like some of these other governors I see on a national level who are just trying to create headlines, probably for their own national ambitions. He just cares about quiet excellence. Wow. And that I can work with. That is deeply aligned with my view.
That's amazing, Dan, because when I think about, the things that come back to me all the time, people ask me what makes me get up, is impact, innovation, and inclusion, of course, right? So I add those up, and I'm always kind of pushing on those initiatives. And then getting to the data, the performance analytics part, that's why I kind of asked you that question about 2030. Yeah. Because I can imagine, like you said, your rubrics and your puzzle, and you're like, okay, this is where we are. Incremental growth, as long as we can get to that delta, and we're growing. Yep. It sounds great.
And by the way, you mentioned inclusion, and I think it's worth commenting on. Because I do consider that also to be part of my life's work. I sat on the board of a nonprofit called Opportunity Network for the last 6, 7, probably on 8 years now. Probably more than that at this point. I was chairman for 6 years. The work is on working with high school students that are high potential but from historically marginalized communities.
Oh, wow.
And that work really got me to understand the premise of inequity and some of the structural components and contributions to inequity. And part of what I've committed myself to is leveraging, whatever privileges I've been afforded. And I sit here recognizing that I'm a white male of European descent. By the way, I joke, the shaved head doesn't exactly help with the optics. but leveraging whatever privileges I've been afforded to do what I can to ensure equitable access to economic growth.
Wow.
My thesis is, if you can grow the pie, and ensure equitable access, which is easy to say, hard to do, but ensure equitable access to that growing pie, I fundamentally believe that is the fastest path to a more just society. I think there is an economic element to societal progression. And one thing I find about the public dialogue is we do spend a lot of time debating and arguing about what we might spend on things. And I sometimes the conversations can become emotional because these are important things. People are fighting for things they care deeply about. But my point is, look, if we grow the pie, and there's simply more to go around, that makes those conversations that much more straightforward.
Right.
So that's part of why I like this role, and how I tie it back to what is one of my personal goals, which is leaving our state and our country a more equitable place.
Right.
I think I can have an impact by focusing on economic progression against those broader
all
goals.
the different, I mean, that to me is, when people, of course, they always say, Jay, what are your thoughts on DEI? What are your thoughts? And I always look at them and I say, look, guys, I look at a pie, entrepreneurs, different demographics, right? Different nationalities. If we can actually get next to those, inequities, and get next to these entrepreneurs and support them, the pie is bigger.
Yeah.
The pie is much larger for all of us. And I don't know, sometimes it takes a minute for people to kind of get that. Yeah. But at the end of the day, if you can help an entrepreneur get to that vision, no matter what, their nationality is, it's still more. Yeah, for the state, right? Yeah. For the state or the local market, help them grow.
And I think there's one other important characteristic as it relates to Connecticut. Look, I mentioned the economic elements of it, which matter. I think it's an attractive economy to do business in. I think it's an attractive community to raise your family in. But there's also something else going on. The governor and I spent a lot of time talking to businesses about relocating to the state, either from outside the state or even outside the country. And there's been something more recent that I've picked up on, and I'll give a specific example. We had an entrepreneur of a very high-profile company, it's a European company, who was still looking to potentially establish operations in the United States. And he came over and wanted to meet with us, talk about what Connecticut was like. And I came in with my whole presentation, ready to talk about economic trends, population trends, et cetera, et cetera. This entrepreneur didn't want to talk about any of that. He wanted to talk about, is Connecticut a place where I can do business, predictable, stable, et cetera? And is it a place where my employees will feel safe and want to live? Wow. And I mentioned some of those characteristics as it relates to other states and other governors who appear to be going after these sort of politically tinged headlines. Right. And the fact that we're focused here on quiet excellence, I think that's increasingly becoming a point of differentiation for the state of Connecticut. Mine is not a political position. I don't view my position as partisan at all. But the fact that Connecticut is a place where we're protecting a woman's access to health care, where we're continuing to subscribe to, promote, and defend our progressive values, while also demonstrating that we can grow our economy faster than anyone else in the region. Right. That to me is really becoming a pretty interesting point of differentiation. It's like the Great Purple Experiment. We're showing that you can have societal progression and economic growth while still managing your fiscal affairs conservatively. That's the great center. And that is actually, despite all the headlines, and particularly if you're an international observer, where a lot of the U.S. looks like one massive dumpster fire right now. Right. A lot of the U.S. who's pandering to either side, again, nonpartisan, could be far left, far right. I think showing the vast majority of our country that is in and around the center. You might be center left, you might be center right, but demonstrating that this can be done and done well. I think that's something that this governor and that this state is really showing the rest of the country and the rest of the world.
I'm glad you added that, because that's almost a point we make at some of our StartUp Westport meetings. And some of the tech companies want to come in to Westport. A few of them were like, so this is great for me with, under 50, 100 employees. But once I get north of that, is this a safe place for my employees?
Yeah.
Would they feel like they belong here? And so we deal with a lot of that now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we like to become the welcome mat,
That's
I like to say.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, welcome mat can be walked over. We don't want to be walked over.
No, not walked over, but
welcome door.
Welcome door.
No, but
right?
I think that's a really important message to amplify, which is you are welcome here.
Right.
This is a state that welcomes everyone. Look, we want you to work hard and contribute to the vibrancy of our communities, to the efficacy and the strength of our economy, but we welcome folks here. I had a funny conversation with a reporter who called me and said, I want to talk about the population trends declining in Connecticut. And I said, what are you talking about? Our population trends are going up. And he said, well, but domestically it's declining. It's only because of international in-migration that our total population is increasing. And he said it like it was a negative thing.
A negative thing, getting international people here.
I said, I forgive me, but one, I find your statement not factually accurate. We are growing. And two, I find the premise that the composition of our growth somehow is negative, positive, or otherwise. To me, we want to welcome all folks here who want to contribute, to what is an incredible place to live, raise a family, start a business.
Think about it, that's New York. That's how I was born. Immigrants coming in. I mean, that's how it.
If you think about it, that's the United States.
That's the United States. Well, essentially the United States. But I was just thinking about all the people that I know that essentially came in. Ellis Island. Everyone came through, and my thought is, it's like that now. When I'm here in Westport, I'm meeting people from, Argentina, just moved here from London, and I said, wow, this is great. And I ask them all the time, why did you choose this town, or this part, the Gold Coast, I call it, I said, why'd you choose it? And they said, we didn't want to do the city. We've done that, and we want to raise a family and have a quality of life. Yeah. That was similar to the European quality of life. And that was something that, when I heard that, I said, wow, I don't know if we're quite there yet, but if we're pushing to graduate into feeling like a European market in the States.
It's the European lifestyle, but we're going to ask you to work a little harder. That's just me making fun of my European compatriots.
Got to work harder. Yeah. So Dan, thank you for taking the time out to share that, because the Visionaries podcast was really to help all the visionaries out there, entrepreneurs that are the dreamers, to really uncover some of the fears and doubts they may have, but actually hear how they can get, involved and push their dream out there. And so to me, you've really added to that message.
Great.
You kind of helped them.
My absolute pleasure. As you know, I started this journey with StartUp Westport.
We did it.
Happy to continue to engage around it, and I will just close the way I hopefully amplified, which is, I think Connecticut is experiencing a moment. I want everyone to see it, realize it, and then help grow it.
That's it.
Help extend it. And that's why I like opportunities like this to get the word out there. Because when I do talk about these trend lines, in my speeches, I always ask for a show of hands. I say, show of hands, who knew that we were the 15th best performing economy last 2 years? And I got to tell you, these are audiences of hundreds of people who are paying attention. And I get no hands in the air. Not one or two. Sometimes I get one or two, but they're people I've told. People that either work for the DECD or previously attended something I spoke at. And when those hands go down, there's nobody. And then I ask, how many of you knew when we were the 48th worst performing economy? And all hands go up.
Of course.
And so I understand why that happens. People pay attention when the news is bad. But when the news is good, and right now the news is good, I need help getting the word out there. Because that's the only way we're going to ultimately invest.
Dan, consider it done. I would definitely make sure that me and my team, we start to push this message. This is great data points.